Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I'm so happy to have Melissa Fraterrigo with us. And she is the author of The Perils of Girlhood, a memoir in essays. And a little bit more about her. She was also the author of the novel Glory Days from University of Nebraska Press, which was named one of the best fiction of 2017 by Chicago Review of Books. Melissa is also the author of the short story collection, The Longest Pregnancy. Her fiction and nonfiction have appeared in a variety of journals, including Puerto de Sol, Massachusetts Review, Fifth Wednesday Journal, Sou'wester, and Shenandoah. She has twice been nominated for Pushcart Prizes. In addition to her publication, she has taught creative writing at Bowling Green State University, Southern Utah University, Penn State Altoona, the Indiana Writers Center, and IUPUI. Melissa currently teaches creative writing at Purdue University and is the founder of Lafayette Writer Studio. Welcome, Melissa, to the program.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you.
I'm so excited to talk about The Perils of Girlhood because it's a memoir and essays, and you cover so much of not only your own journey, your journey through motherhood, through girlhood, through everything. You tie it in with pop culture moments, including one of my favorites, Judy Blume's Forever, which was like my Bible as a teenage girl.
Right.
So let's talk about, first of all, you've been a fiction writer. I mean, writing memoir, and I'm in the middle of writing my own memoir right now. It's such a different animal. Can you talk about, first of all, the reason why you wanted to write a memoir and essays, and then the differences between fiction and memoir writing?
For sure. Yeah. So first off, I should say that although I am a fiction writer, I feel like I didn't have much choice in drafting memoir. It was just all I was suddenly drawn to. During the pandemic, I just couldn't draft fiction. I can even remember the last story that I was working on. The last couple lines, I'd maybe draft a line, maybe a paragraph, but I didn't feel that heart, that strong pull from my very being that was going to allow me to continue with the story. And yet at the same time, I was really swept away by true stories, by memoir and memoir essays, where I had this sense that the writer was really trying to puzzle through their place in the world. And they weren't necessarily coming to the page with having figured all that out, but they were wrestling with some things in the process of drafting. And I was just so attracted to that. And so I kind of simply stopped writing fiction and focused on learning all that I could about the essay form. Fortunately, so many of the attributes of what makes a good novel or a good story cross over into the prose of creative nonfiction. You know, you're still working to bring in details and sensory details. You still want tension and momentum. You still want to make sure that we've got characterization, micro characterization, and scene writing. So many of the elements that I loved about fiction served me well when I started writing creative nonfiction.
That's great. And did I read somewhere that one of your mentors or teachers was Joanne Beard, author of so much, but the fourth state of matter, which is just a pivotal writing exercise in braiding that I share with my students.
Yes, kind of an interesting story. I earned my bachelor's from the University of Iowa, and it was the spring of 1992. Joanne Beard was my rhetoric teacher. So I was a freshman at Iowa. So this is somebody who, at the time, she was in the nonfiction writing program at Iowa, but here she was teaching basically composition. But she was someone who kept me after class one day after turning back a writing exercise and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a writer?" And I had wanted to be a writer since I was a very young age, but she was someone who encouraged me. Even just having her notice me in that way really gave me the momentum to kind of keep going, even though I did some other things prior to really pursuing writing. She
I
has been
love
a great
that.
mentor to me.
I love that. So she focuses a lot on braiding, and you've done braiding within this memoir and essays. Particularly, there's so much that stuck out to me. You wrote about the girls who had been hiking and were murdered. And I remember that when that was in the news. And then you tied it in with your own fears about your twin daughters. And one of your daughters is named Estelle, I believe.
Yes.
Great name.
It is a great name. It is a great name.
It actually, the Latin definition of it means star. So if you don't know that, you could tell her that.
I didn't know that. I'm going to share that with her this evening.
So the fact that you braid it in, it gives that gravitas. It adds that weight to it. And then later you do a braiding of crocodiles and
Mhm.
predators, and it's just fascinating. And I think braiding needs to be done well because people can do braiding by just putting a line in. But if it's not connected to what the thread is or an underlying emotional implication, then it kind of loses weight. But with yours, it works very well because showing an actual situation where two girls around the age of your daughters at the time were hiking and were killed, and they actually arrested the person, and then tying it in with your daughters actually having someone on the playground who was trying to talk to them or stalk them or watch them. And it just brought that visceral fear in that as parents, I mean, I'm a parent of a 16-year-old, so I get it. It never goes away. When I was a new mother, and I had my daughter in midlife. When I was a new mother, I remember waking up from dreams where somebody was trying to grab the stroller out of my hands, and I would just like, fight and
Oh my
fight and
God.
pull it away. And I felt the adrenaline. So that brought back that visceral reaction for me reading those passages in your book.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think as a mother, those fears only become more a part of our life as we go on. I mean, you talk about the stroller. I'm sure you've got your own fears that have just kind of translated as time has gone on. I do think that the braided form is really helpful when you are trying to figure something out and you don't necessarily want to come at it head on, but a braid is a form of a lyric essay, which is a little bit more concerned with language and with form. And so when you're writing about something that is challenging or even traumatic, by considering bringing in different stories, it adds a sense of refraction alongside that personal that I think sometimes if you were to just, like in that essay, if I was to just write about the girls, Abigail and Liberty, who were ultimately murdered, I don't think that the essay itself would carry the same emotional impact. But by bringing in the fear culture that I experienced in the 1980s, by bringing in the way in which women's brains are actually changed with motherhood, and talking about my experience raising my daughters. And this is all from the title essay, The Perils of Girlhood. I think it allows that content to carry a greater resonance for sure.
Do you find it harder to write memoir than fiction?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I just think that I've evolved as a person throughout time. When I first wrote fiction, I got such a kick out of putting my characters in situations and kind of seeing how they would work out a scenario. The real what if. There's a book by Anne Bernays it's called What If. It's a craft book. But with memoir, I had to be really brave. I didn't have characters to stand behind. And yet the payoff was also larger because there is that sense of muscling through something as you get those sentences, as you get those paragraphs down. You're trying to figure something out that you may not know. And you might even get to the end of the essay and you still haven't come to that conclusion. But the process of trying can feel so enlightening.
Yeah, I was talking to my friend Abby Thomas the other day, Abigail Thomas, who wrote one of your blurbs, and talking about a passage I was struggling in writing my memoir. And she said, just keep writing and you'll write to the truth. Like you'll find the answer. It might just come to you, but even if you don't know it now, it's okay.
I
And
agree.
it's hard for me because I'm a former magazine editor in chief and I'm used to like curating and editing and all that. I package material for popular consumption. So that idea of like not knowing it is just that uncertainty is a little scary.
I agree. And I think also that points to the fact that everybody works differently. One of the students, I'm also teaching a graduate class right now at Butler University. And one of my students was talking the other day about the fact that when he first gets an idea for an essay, he goes on a walk and he doesn't stop walking until he's figured the whole essay out in his head, which is kind of similar to how John Irving writes his novels, and that he gets a clear sense of the whole draft, which might take him years, just kind of carrying that thought in his head before he actually puts those words down. So some people find it exciting to work with that uncertainty, and other people may not. And I think that that's where, as a writer, you bring in your tricks. You try and figure out, how am I going to work with my process? How am I going to be a friend to myself rather than like, I think we all have situations where we cut ourselves down, or we think negatively, or we criticize ourselves for not doing it the way that somebody else does. But that's kind of the power of writing too, is figuring out how to work with yourself.
And part of me, because I'm creative, wants to like come up with a new form even. I'm like, I want to do something different with it. So it's funny. It's like the dichotomies, right? Like
Right.
struggling with the uncertainty, but also wanting to create your own thing. Now, that leads me to a question for you. And it's something I'm struggling with. You have a lot in here, from your childhood to dealing with an inappropriate coach, and every woman, I don't care how old they are or where they are in their life, can kind of relate to having some inappropriate teacher, RA, somebody in the world who, because that's just the world that we live in, right? It's the perils of girlhood, as you say in the book. And then you go into, all the things you dealt with, including disordered eating, which is something girls absolutely deal with in every aspect today. And then you went into dating and you went into motherhood and marriage and, health issues from your children, from your husband. You have so much in there, including the braiding, the real stories like, Liberty and Abigail, like just so much, the pop culture, Judy Blume, all that, and the meanings to you. How do you decide what to keep and what to leave out from the treasure trove of your memory that you're excavating all this from?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for complimenting my memory. It's something that my family has made fun of me about throughout time, but I think it's great that I remember our curtains when I was 8 years old, our kitchen curtains. I do want to impress the fact that the book took about 5 years to write, and I had a very different vision initially for the book. You brought up the idea that pop culture appears throughout the book, and that's because really, as a younger person, I didn't feel like I had maybe great role models. The role models that I experienced were Judy Blume, Madonna running across the screen in her cone bra, movies and TV shows and books. And so I wanted to make sure that the book wasn't just about me and my experience. So I really wanted to weave in that era of the 80s and 90s. And so I initially had about a dozen little pop cultural vignettes or asides that were all written in the second person. And my plan had been that there would be one of these vignettes before and after an essay that would highlight a specific pop cultural element that was then in that essay. But a careful reader ultimately helped me realize that kind of structure, and this kind of goes back to your idea of wanting to make a new form, just took too much attention away from the personal story. So I wove in a lot of those details, but you may not be able to kind of see the seams.
Okay, so you would give an instance, a situation, a story, and then you would weave in like the part where you did like Judy Blume. Do you want to read that part?
I think that's in Coach Math.
Page 18?
Okay. So this is from the second essay in the book. It's called On the Verge of Being, and it's told from that communal first person point of view. We practice walking during recess, heads high, hips swishing. On the playground, we wear our Oxford collars up, hike our plaid skirts higher, then pull them back down when the bell rings. We don't say it out loud, but we envy Anna's chest. Two giant hills she cannot disguise under sweater vests or cabled cardigans. The boys make up songs about her and snap her bra more than ours. We worry our breasts will not grow. At school, we pass around a rumpled copy of Judy Blume's Forever. She became our surrogate mother, teaching us everything about our bodies, from masturbation to sex, menstruation to dating. Bloom wrote Forever after her daughter requested a story where two nice kids have sex and don't die. In our school, sex education class consisted of an hour-long discussion of male and female body parts by the school nurse, or a film strip with the science teacher, which ended with our teacher asking, "Are there any questions?" Yes, we had questions, many, many questions, but we weren't about to ask them.
Beautiful. So this is great because I can almost visualize how originally you were doing it. You were doing the scene about walking with all the detail, and then you would put something in a very third person way about Judy Blume's Forever. But here you made the decision to weave it around the story. And I think it works very effectively because it flows.
It does. I think it's pretty organic. I will say that it was messy because so I had all these vignettes, and then I had what I thought was the draft of the memoir. And fortunately, I had some time. I did two different kind of writing residencies where I could just focus on the manuscript with all of those drafts out and about, and sticky notes where I would go through and I was tracking to see where are specific threads appearing, where can I maybe even reiterate a thread or a story memory so it replicates the way our minds work, the way the memory works itself. So that concentrated effort working on the book was key.
That's great that you had that opportunity to do the residencies. I never find that quiet time. I think that's really good that you were able to make that happen. So I noticed something that even though it's called The Perils of Girlhood, you don't really get to talk about your girls until like the section about your dad and his anger. And obviously, it's something that you feel very connected to, like your own moments of irritation. I could totally relate, believe me, with your daughters. So it's interesting that that's where you start the mention of your children. It's not about sexuality, it's about anger and connected to your father. What was the decision behind that choice to bring it in that specific place?
Yeah, I love that you noticed that. That was actually the first piece of the book that I wrote. So that was the very first essay, even though it's now the fifth one in the book, More Like Dad, which explores my father's volatile anger and then how during the pandemic I was noticing my own outbursts with my daughters and wanted to do some thinking about the legacy of anger and our parents' traumas. And so I think that my daughter simply appeared there because that's where in the process of really writing this book it began. But I also, throughout the drafting of the book, even though my daughters may not have made it to a scene itself, especially some of the earlier essays where I'm a younger person, they were always in the back of my mind because I really feel like the book was a quest to help them make sense of adolescence. I started drafting it when they were not yet teenagers themselves. And I was starting to notice them struggling with so many of the same issues that I had experienced in the 80s and 90s, issues with friends, comments about not liking their bodies or the way clothes fit them. And I realized that really the best way to help them would be for me to look back at the lessons of my own girlhood and then see what I could kind of bring forward for them.
And you talk about so many of these situations where men have a feeling of privilege or acting a certain way towards women, which is endemic, right? And again, you use a structure in particularly the elements of fiction when you're talking about Devers, who is a former student of yours and inappropriate in so many ways. People have to read to see how badly, but you use a braided style of like the elements of fiction to employ, you say you start with, to build a successful story, many writers employ a structure of conflict crisis resolution. And so you start with conflict and you explain the meaning of it in writing a story, but then you connect it to your story with this student and then setting and then characters. And it's all the story and dialogue and tension and stakes and crisis and theme and resolution. And the resolution is satisfying. But how did you decide to take this kind of story and frame it this way?
The original draft was simply just a draft of this story, this inappropriate student that I had, and the way that I had to navigate that in the classroom. And I was sending it out for publication for quite some time, and it just wasn't landing. And I am a pretty fierce reviser. I believe in revision. I believe that, you kind of bring forward with each version of a piece the person you are today, and that's different than who you were 2 weeks ago. And so ultimately, at some point, I might have been reading more hermit crab forms where the writer uses the form of an essay to take on that shape to tell their personal story. So I realized that the elements of fiction, which is what we were studying in class, it was a fiction writing class, worked perfectly to add a little more both structure to the essay, but also tension. Because, when you have those breaks, when you have that white space, your reader is wondering what's going to happen next. And you, as the author, are choosing to put the pause on things. And it really, I think, increases the momentum a little bit.
I think it also gave this very kind of scary story of a student who acted horribly. It gives a little distant because the reader is reading this thing, and the way that you're framing it, it builds another structure in your mind. And yes, and it's connected to the topic of the class as well. So I think it makes it easier to read something that's difficult.
You're totally right. I think it adds distance. And I also think that something that I was aware of throughout the drafting process, and I think this has a lot to do, just like my personality in general, I didn't want to be judgmental. I didn't want to go back and, judge my parents maybe for some of their choices, or, really hit too hard on Devers, the student in that moment. But by using structure, by using details, you can imply things to the reader, but then let the reader come to their own conclusions. And it provides more of a like back and forth. The reader becomes more of a co-creator alongside the author, I think.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like how the co-creator thing happens? Like, what is that?
I think rather than, and maybe it comes back to at its most basic, that idea of showing and not telling. So rather than simply telling you, boy, my dad had a bad temper, or boy, this student I had in my class was a real pain to deal with, I could show that through some of those structural choices, like in the elements of fiction, by using that white space, by using that form, where I'm bringing in the idea of how a story itself is structured, because I don't call it out. It's still up to the reader to make that connection between the personal story that I'm sharing and the form. So I think anytime you can allow your reader an opportunity to bring their own knowledge to the page, it really deepens their experience with the book, because it becomes less about that author's experience, and suddenly the reader is thinking about their own experiences.
I love that. I want to get a little granular. So, how did you decide when you were writing it? Did you do, I don't know, an outline? Did you do whiteboard? How did you decide what was in there and what was not? You probably have a million stories from girlhood. How did you decide? I mean, Coach Matt definitely had to be in there. Like, what was that process?
Yeah, once I got to that point, it was really fun. And yet there are also some essays that didn't make it. When I did have some concentrated time with the manuscript itself, this sounds a little woo-woo, but when I have a manuscript, it's almost tactile to me. And I can feel what moments have heat and which other ones do not. And I can feel how they speak to each other, especially when I have that hard copy of an essay or of a chapter. And so it took a lot of moments where I was just reading the manuscript from beginning to end and really paying attention to how that felt on the inside. And I also read the book out loud multiple times, so I could kind of sense how it would rest with the reader's ear.
I like that. I think reading out loud is really helpful. I agree. I mean, mine's a writing book, but I did the same thing before the final version. How are your twins reacting to this book being out in the world?
It's been interesting. One of my daughters read it right off the bat as soon as I had an arc, and she's like, wow, mom, it's good. It's good. That was great. My other daughter, Estelle, is less interested in knowing that side of mom. I am mom, and I respect that. Both of the girls have read essays where they appear, because they ultimately have the option of saying, I don't want that to be out in the world, mom. I would not try and publish that essay, or I certainly wouldn't include it in the book. So
And so how old are they now?
they're 16 as well.
Oh my goodness.
So you
Wow.
you you and I are living the dream.
Oh, we are. Oh, we are. It's the snark-mobile years.
It is interesting. Yeah. No day is like the one before.
Every day is different, and it's just very entertaining. I don't know about yours, but mine is driving now. She has her learner's permit. So I think she gets the official permit when she's 17, but
Okay.
she can drive with an adult in the car. Let's clarify.
It's crazy. Yeah. Add to some more of mom's fears for sure.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. When you're stepping on the imaginary brake in the car and you're like, oh, it's not here. Okay. But she's a good driver. She has a good head on her shoulders, but there's still all these, you just have fears. Their worlds are getting bigger.
Yes.
That's what's happening. Their worlds are expanding. Yeah.
And that's what's been interesting also about the book, even though, like I said, one of my daughters hasn't read it in its entirety, but the book has offered us opportunity to have some conversations about these larger issues. For instance, the essay, The Telling, talks about kind of some violence that I experienced at the hand of a
Gideon.
high school date. Yeah,
Yeah.
Gideon. And before that essay was published, it was initially published in Hippocampus. I had to talk to my girls about consent, which was a word that we didn't even use in the 80s and 90s. I don't even know if it existed, but it was not anything that I can remember anybody talking to me about.
Yeah. And you also reference, it's not the one with Gideon, but there's another example where you're in someone's room, I think it's in college, and he's not willing to let you go. And you had Mace in the other room, which, that wasn't going to help at the moment. And it's just the type of things, the fears that go through the head. I remember in college when everyone was leaving. Nobody even told me this, but like everyone was leaving the room and this one guy was lingering. I'm like, no, everybody out. Everybody's going out. Goodbye, good night. But what if I didn't? What if I didn't have that, stand up for myself attitude, which is what I'm
Absolutely.
always trying to teach my daughter.
Right. Yeah, and that's what's interesting is I think a lot of women and even, this new generation coming up and generations that are much older than us, everybody has their stories about fear, about the male gaze. And sometimes it can be helpful to share those with one another because it does generate conversation and that's how we learn.
Yeah. So what do you want most to happen with this book being out in the world?
I think I probably want those conversations to take place. Like I mentioned, there were things that nobody talked to me about. And certainly some of the conversations that I've had with my daughters haven't always been comfortable. But I'm just so heartened by some of the things that others have been sharing with me during readings or over email about how they saw themselves in the book and how it's encouraging them to reflect on their own girlhood and their own experiences with the women and girls in their lives.
Have you reached out to Judy Blume?
I haven't. Oh my gosh, I don't believe I didn't
Tag
think of
her
that.
on social or something.
Why have I not done that? Thank you, Estelle. Thank you. That's
Why
great.
not? And she has a bookstore in Key West, Florida. So
That's right. Okay, I need to get to Florida.
there you go. Exactly. And supposedly people say she sometimes is there stocking the shelves and wearing, jeans and very low key. So I know that would be amazing.
Her
Someone the
books are
other day
great.
told me like their dream is to meet her. I know, because she's such a, Madonna too, but Madonna's like, who's going to meet Madonna? Although I went to
Right.
every single one of her concerts up until when I was pregnant with my daughter, 6 months pregnant. Like my daughter, that was her first concert, Madonna.
So funny.
So I can relate to so many of the cultural moments you mentioned and the people. So what is next for you?
Well, obviously, I'm promoting the Perils of Girlhood now,
Yes.
but I don't think I'm quite done with this topic. I still have essays that I'm working on that I'm puzzling through, and I find great joy from that experience. I'm also continuing to teach writing, and the Lafayette Writers Studio, I'm offering a class called I'm Just a Girl, Writing Girlhood, where I'm going to encourage others to kind of go through this process, exploring your girlhood. What were some of the beliefs that you had and why? Unpacking our own notions of gender and girlhood in particular.
That sounds like a great class. Well,
Thank you.
Melissa, this has been such a pleasure. I've loved talking to you about craft and how you came up with writing all these pieces and weaving them together, and how much important, essential information for mothers of girls and for women out there in the world, and even the men who want to know how to talk to the women in the world. So, the Perils of Girlhood, everyone. Thank you,
Thank,
Melissa.
thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it, Estelle.
It was such a pleasure. Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.